Okay, so good evening everyone. As a continuation of our discussion last time, we'll be discussing tonight, because I have been recording this like 10 in the evening, interlanguage and the natural route of development. On our previous discussion, we have been discussing everything about if there is a natural route of development. And in this topic, we'll be discussing the interlanguage and the theories behind the hypothesis about if there is really a natural route of development. So first we have the goal of this chapter is to examine the claims that L2 learners acquire a knowledge of L2 or second language in a fixed order as a result of a predisposition to process language data in highly specific ways. So whenever we say fixed order, these are based on a theory that stresses the learner internal factors. So this is not all about the behaviorist learning theory, but the innatist, or what we call the cognitivist theories, which contribute to acquisition. So let's have first the mentalist account of L1 acquisition. According to Chomsky, Noam Chomsky stressed the active contribution of the child in learning a language instead of imitation and reinforcement. So as what I have said a while ago, this is different from the behaviorist learning theory. He stated that child's knowledge of his mother tongue was derived from a universal grammar. Now, what is a universal grammar? It is a set of innate linguistic principles which comprise the initial state and which control the form which the sentences of any given language could take. So where can we find the universal grammar? This is in the language acquisition device. So we have here the flow. So you have the primary linguistic data. Of course, in order for the language acquisition device to operate, there should be an input. The primary linguistic data is the input, and then the acquisition device, your universal grammar, and then you come up with the universal grammar that is the response. So you have the input first given to your language acquisition device in order for you to have the universal grammar. Okay. So language, according to mentalist view of first language, it is a human-specific faculty. It exists as an independent faculty in the human mind. That there is no research still available to see if there is really a language acquisition device, because we can't, you can't study everything inside the mind. Mind per se is abstract. However, according to the mentalist's point of view, it is a human-specific faculty and an independent faculty in the human mind. The primary determinant of first language acquisition is the child's acquisition device. However, acquisition device atrophies with the age. Whenever you say atrophies, it means that it deficits. As you get older, the language acquisition device deficits its value. So we will go back to what we have watched last time on our school book, that you have a child, and then the case there is that there was no input, therefore the child was not able to learn the language, because as you get older, it becomes for you, the older you are, the harder you will adjust in order to learn a particular language. The process of acquisition consists of hypothesis testing. So first you have the error analysis. Later on we will discuss what error analysis is. But that is an L1 and L2 learners make errors in order to test out certain hypotheses about the nature of the language they are learning. In error analysis, you are like literally analyzing the errors that they are committing. Language acquisition is a universal process. It refers to the stages of development that characterize the route that the child follows. So let's have the interlanguage. What is an interlanguage? Last time when we had our introduction about the foundations of English as second language, Dr. Kayago have mentioned already what interlanguage is. But to deepen our knowledge on that, let's discuss it this time. So what is interlanguage? It was first used by Selinker in 1972. It refers to the structured system which the learner constructs at any given age in his development. Take note of the word structured system because we have another term here. It also refers to the interlocking system. In short, it is not only a structured system but an interlocking system as well, which form the learner's built-in syllabus. So you call that interlanguage continuum. So NEMSR 1971 had the following assumptions. First, you have, at any given time, interlanguage is distinct from L1 and L2. Is it the same? It's different. And the second one, the interlanguage forms an evolving series. The interlanguage on the young years, while you are having the language, may be different as you go on learning the language. And the last one is that in a given contact situation, the interlanguage of learners at the same age of proficiency roughly coincide. Whenever you say same age of proficiency, that doesn't mean that you are 11 years old and the one you are talking to is 11 and that your interlanguage will coincide. No, it talks about the proficiency with whether you are old or you are young. If the age of your proficiency is still the same, then probably your interlanguage would roughly coincide. There are 5 principal processes operated in interlanguage according to Selinker 1972. So first you have the language transfer. Last time we have discussed what language transfer is. Next, you have overgeneralization of language target rules. Later on we will discuss what overgeneralization is. You have the transfer of training or the transfer of learning. Strategies of learning the second language, and the last one is the strategies of second language communication. So these are the 5 principal processes operated in interlanguage. Okay, so when you say interference, it is seen as one of the processes responsible for interlanguage. If there is an interference, probably there will become an interlanguage. The 5 processes are the means to reduce the learning burden to manageable proportions because they tend to simplify it according to Widowson 1975. In short, the 5 processes that I have given you a while ago are the means to reduce the learning burden to manageable proportions. Why do the learners reduce the proportions? It is because language is very complex. At a given age, you can't study fluently one language, and in order for you to cope with the complexity of the language, the child or the learner tend to reduce the learning burden. And those are the 5 processes that I have given a while ago in order to simplify, to make it easier for them to learn the language. Selinker noted that many L2 learners failed to reach target language competence. Why? Because they stop learning when their interlanguage contains at least some rules different from those of the target language system. That is why you call it interference. And when you say it is different from those of the target language system, you have what you call pigeonization or fossilization. Like for example, our second language is English. If you will be learning French, that will become the third or the foreign language of the Filipinos. The vowels and the letters of the French language is different from the English language. So if you will look at the complexity of their language compared to the English language, you tend to give up on learning the language because it is different from your second language. When it becomes different, when the rules in our language becomes not the rule of other languages, that talks about pigeonization or fossilization. So fossilization has two forms. First, you have the correct. If the rules specifically of a target language is the same with the set of rules you have, fossilization of the correct form will occur. However, if it is not the same, it will be in a form of error. If the feature does not have the same form with the target language, that is what we normally have whenever we study French in relation to English. So mostly you will have an error form. So if you can think of other language which is somehow similar to the English language, then you could probably have a correct form. Okay. So there are causes of fossilization according to Selinker and Lamandela in 1978. First is that the learner believes that he does not need to develop his interlanguage any further in order to communicate effectively whatever he wants to. You call that external. When you believe that you do not need to develop your interlanguage because probably you think that you are competent enough, then one cause is external factors. When you talk of internal factors, there is a change in the neutral structure of the brain as a result of age-restricted operation of the hypothesis testing mechanisms. When you talk about external causes of fossilization, that talks about your fluency and your competence, communicative competence in delivering the language. When you talk about the internal cause of fossilization, that talks about your language acquisition device not being used while you are still young. That is why you have there structure of his brain as a result of age restrict the operation of the hypothesis testing mechanisms. So that is one of the cause and the factor. According to Chomsky, the acquisition device is the true determinant of L1 acquisition, and acquisition becomes impossible after puberty. However, other studies, they did not literally say it is impossible, but it is possible for you to learn the language. However, becoming fluent and becoming competent in performing the language, then that is when the word impossible will come. With that, Salinker suggested that those who successfully achieve the native speaker proficiency in the target language do so because, why? They continually use the acquisition device. So you have the Latin language structure. In short, if you will be able to discover, if you will be able to use the language acquisition device younger, you will be able to attain the native speaker proficiency. Now the challenge is for the high school teachers, if we still have students who were not really developed, how are we going to develop them? We have some senior high school students as well. So for the elementary teacher, then I think that is their role because it is after the puberty wherein the language acquisition device becomes not that good. In short, before puberty, that is the proper age for a child to be nurtured in a particular language. According to Salinker, second language acquisition can proceed into two different ways. First, utilization of the same mechanisms as L1 acquisition that talks about the natural route of development. And second, making use of alternative mechanisms. You call that cognitive organizer, according to Dulay and Burt in 1977. The process of SLA that resulted from its operation is called creative construction. So there are three principal features of interlanguage. First, interlanguage is permeable. What is permeable? So whenever you say interlanguage is permeable, it means that The rules that constitute to the learner's knowledge at any one stage are not fixed, but are open to amendment. That is why interlanguage is evolving, because it is an evolving series, because it is permeable, it is open for changes. Next, interlanguage is dynamic. It is constantly changing, slowly revises systems to accommodate new hypotheses about the target language system. It is dynamic in the sense that when you have an old system and a new system was introduced by the target language, the interlanguage tends to revise the old system to accommodate the new one. And last one is interlanguage is systematic. It is rule-based nature of the learner's use of the second language. Bases performance plans on existing rules system. When you say systematic, it follows a process. It follows a system, a very specific system. Okay. Salinger acknowledged that the behavioral events that have aroused the greatest interest in discussions of SLA have been errors. We have discussed error analysis. So let us deepen what error analysis is. So whenever you say error analysis, it is an impressionistic collections of common errors and their linguistic classification. You tend to identify the error and you tend to classify linguistically what that error is. So the goal is to provide an information which could be used to sequence items for teaching or to devise remedial lessons. In our class, whenever we see a particular topic, it was not grasped by the student well based on the assessment, we tend to do remedial lessons. Why? Because most of them did not get the correct answer on this particular item, right? You call that error analysis in our classroom, and that is the goal of error analysis. However, on the latter part, contrastive analysis grew. It is different from error analysis. It focuses more on the behaviorist learning theory. They claim that the prevention of errors was better than the identification of errors. So they are more into prevention. They are more into giving ways, although that is the goal of error analysis. So these are the procedure of the error analysis. So first, you have a corpus of language, or a structure of a particular language specifically is selected. A body of language is selected. Errors in the language are identified. You select and then you identify the errors. And then, according to what we have defined a while ago, you classify it. The errors are classified. And then the errors are explained. After being classified, explained. And then the errors are being evaluated. So these are the process whenever we do error analysis. So these are the questions that we normally do whenever we have error analysis. You have, what light can the study of learners' errors throw on the sequence of development through which learner pass? Is it really important? What is the significance of studying the errors committed by the learners on their natural route of development? And what light can errors shed on the strategies that the learner uses to assimilate the rules of L2? Is there a significance between the two, the errors and the rules? So we will be answering that. Error analysis have two kinds of information about interlanguage. So first, you have linguistic type of errors. So whenever you say linguistic type of errors, that talks about, it provides a synchronic description of learner errors. However, an analysis of the linguistic type of errors produced by learners does not tell us more about the sequence of development, because technically speaking, or just identifying the errors committed by a student specifically, let's say, on a particular system or subsystem, let's say the grammar, the proper use of subject and verb, subject verb agreement. So that is what you are looking into linguistic type of errors, technical part. However, on the second type of error, you have the psycholinguistic type of errors. A study of errors reveals conclusively that there is no single or prime cause of errors, and this provides clues about the kinds of strategies learners employ to simplify the task. So you are talking about the strategies already in the psycholinguistic. How do learners learn? How do learners simplify? What is their strategy in simplifying the task of learning the second language? So I have given you already a while ago the 5 processes. So those are their strategies. So first, you have overgeneralization. It is a device used when the items do not carry any obvious contrast for the learner. For example, the suffix ed. When do we use ed? Whenever you use the form of the verb, past form. However, for some, if you are a new language learner, it may seem to have no meaning at all, because in a context, you can use yesterday to indicate that the action is being done in the past. So if you are new in learning the language, why use ed if you can use yesterday? So that is overgeneralization. Next, you have ignorance of rule restrictions. It occurs when rules are extended to contexts where in target language usage, they do not apply. Ignorance of rule restrictions from the word itself. Next, you have the incomplete application of rules. Involves a failure to learn the more complex types of structure because the learner finds he can achieve effective communication by using relatively simple rules. Why do I need to study subject-verb agreement if I can communicate English? Like, I have the accent of the native speaker, so why do I still need to learn that? So if the learner has that kind of concept, he has an incomplete application of rules. And that is what you can really see whenever the native speakers, let's say for example the Americans, use their language. They have an incomplete application of the rules of their own language. And last one is false concepts hypothesized. Refers to errors derived from faulty understanding of target language distinction. Refers to errors which you hypothesize and which you believe is true, but it's not. Okay. George in 1972 argues that errors derived from the learner's need to exploit the redundancy of language by omitting elements that are non-essential for the communication of meaning. The most significant contribution of error analysis lies in its success in what? Elevating the status of errors from undesirability to that of a guide to the inner workings of the language learning process. Because if you do error analysis, you elevate the status of errors. If you have a lot of errors and then you will do error analysis, the errors will be mitigated. Okay. So there are empirical evidences, there are real life researches for the interlanguage hypothesis. So it is required to decide on the nature of the interlanguage continuum. So according to Corder 1978, he has 2 views of the interlanguage continuum. First, he called it the restructuring continuum. What is that? The learner is seen as gradually replacing features of his mother tongue as he requires features of the target language. Now that is the time when you are about to learn a particular language and you tend to replace the feature of your mother tongue. So you call it restructuring continuum. Next is recreation continuum. The learner is seen as slowly creating the rule system of the target in a manner very similar to the child's acquisition of his first language that talks about now the natural route of development. The learner is seen as slowly creating, the term is creating the rule system of the target language in a manner that is very similar to the child's acquisition of his first language. So there are evidences. We are talking about empirical evidences. So first you have cross-sectional research. Whenever you try to prove a particular theory, especially in language, you do not only give, links, but the best thing to provide is in a form of research. It should be factual. It is commonly referred to as morpheme studies. So we all know what morpheme is. It carried out to investigate the order of acquisition of a range of grammatical factors in the speech. A range of grammatical factors in the speech of L2 learners. It is motivated by the hypothesis that there was an invariant. In short, there is a steady order in second language acquisition, which was the result of universal processing strategies similar to those observed in L1 acquisition. It is motivated by the fact that there is a steady order. How a particular learner learned his first language, the strategies in the acquisition is somehow the same because it has a steady order. So who conducted the researches? Dulai and Burt, 1973 to 1974, claimed that the vast majority of errors, we're still talking about error analysis, produced by the child L2 learners were developmental, and that the acquisition orders of child learners remained the same. It is developmental, it is progressive. However, Larsen and Freeman in 1976 found that the accuracy orders of adult learners varied according to the elicitation of the instrument used. The orders on oral production tasks agreed with Dulai and Burt. However, listening, reading, and writing tasks produced different orders. Going back to the language acquisition device, you can learn the language, but if you are an old learner, that is what the other part there is talking about. However, listening, reading, and writing tasks produce different orders. But if you will be learning the language at a young age, it will not have a different order because you have utilized properly your language acquisition device. Apart from that, apart from the cross-sectional, you have the longitudinal studies. So it tried to account for the gradual growth of competence in terms of the strategies used by a learner at different developmental point. It focuses on acquisition of particular grammatical subsystems. So you have in the grammar, the researchers have tried to only picked 3 subsystems. You have the negatives, interrogatives, and the relative clauses. So let's have the negation first. According to Schumann, 1979, it provides an excellent overview of a range of studies of SLA negation. For example, I will be giving you here 4 examples of a particular language, but I want you to identify the differences of each language since we have talked about that it is developmental. First, so in all languages there, in all sentences rather, you have negations, you have negatives. First, you have no, very good. The second one, you have I know can swim. And the third, you have I can play this one. And the last one, you have he doesn't know anything. If you will look closely to how negatives are being used in that sentence, you will see a progress from 1 to 4. Why? Because in the first part, the internal negation develops. The negative particle is moved inside the utterance. The child does not know when to use negatives properly. No, you have there I know can swim, and then you have I can't play this one. It involves already the negative attachment to modal verbs, but is it somehow correct? Yes, because we will be comparing that to the first one and two, it gradually becomes correct, grammatically correct, until the child developed how to use negatives already. So from no very good to no, I know can swim, instead of saying I can't swim, to I can't play this one, instead of saying I cannot, but that is the contraction, and he does not know anything. So there is a process, there is a development in the use of negation. That is the same thing with what happened to interrogation as well, the interrogatives. You know, there are two types of interrogatives. You have the yes, no, and you have the WH questions. For example, so you have three examples there. I am coloring. What are you doing? Are you a nurse? What have you observed in the first example? That is a declarative sentence. However, it has a question mark at the end because the child tends to have a rising intonation at the end, because the child doesn't know when to use the falling and the rising intonation, because the child doesn't still know, he is yet to learn what yes, no, and WH questions are. And then you go back with what you are doing, and you go further with what you are doing, and then are you a nurse? So that is the correct construction of already. Development of the rules of interrogation is gradual, as you can see on the examples, involving overlapping stages and the slow replacement of transitional forms. Imagine you are having a declarative sentence, but the intonation that you are using is for the interrogative sentence. So that is if you are yet to learn what interrogation is. Okay, next, you have relative clauses. For example, Joshua's a boy who is silly. What are relative clauses anyway? What are relative pronouns? So it tries to define or to pertain, or that clause defines the noun that precedes that clause that you are talking about. If you talk about relative pronoun, that talks about the pronoun that pertains to the noun that it precedes. So on the first sentence, Joshua's boy who is silly, what can you observe there? The object of the